.NET Aspire and Databases with Jerry Nixon.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast and deliver quality and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a full-service software architecture and engineering firm that serves companies using .NET and Microsoft technologies, building mission-critical software, rescuing troubled projects, and empowering software delivery teams with a proven approach. I am excited to announce that my latest book has been fully released and is being distributed. It's called The 5 Pillars, Leadership for Effective Custom Software. And it's really about software leadership and how to run and properly lead a software engineering team. And so if you want your team to deliver world-class results, this book could be for you. And teams are doing book studies and discussions around it. There's a book study guide that can help with retrospective conversations. And also, if any listeners would like a complimentary electronic copy of the book, just send me an email and I'd be happy to get it to you. And of course, you can buy hardcover, softcover, Kindle, as well as audiobook on audible.com, all the different formats. And also for those of you who are in a lead architect position, you might want to join our monthly forums. These are peer groups that I enjoy facilitating, and you can sign up on clearmeasure.com. It's a video call of peers, of people who are in architect role or leading software engineers. And we're also launching a new lead engineer live stream. And so you can go to youtube.com/clearmeasure for that. Any software engineer looking to move into a lead software engineer role, that could be interesting. My guest today on the show is Jerry Nixon. And he's a principal program manager on the SQL Server team focused on the data API builder. He's also a fanatic for C# and Star Trek and etymology. He also serves as a professor at Colorado Christian University. So Jerry, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Thank you for having me here. Thank you, Mr. Palermo. I'll tell you what, I've never met a Palermo I didn't like. So it's really a pleasure of mine to be here. And, I just kind of enjoy the vibe and pace of your podcast as well. So I'm happy to be part of it for sure. And I feel honored that you've invited me.
Oh, fantastic. Well, what you've been working on is really intriguing, and I think it'll be of interest to the listeners. I want to ask you about all of your work on the data side of .NET Aspire. But before we get into that, I'd love to ask my guests, if you to go back in time, what are the key events or moments that you think maybe were turning points that have guided your career into working on the types of things that you're working on today?
Yeah, that's funny. I always describe my life as a pearl necklace, and where you have like these moments in time, and then you have these long stretches of skinny nothing, and then you have this next pearl that happens. And sometimes it's a job that you get, sometimes it's a person that you meet, a technology perhaps that you're learning. More often it has to do with people more than technology. And I totally understand. As I walk kind of back through, I also see kind of how lucky I am as well. A lot of things have just been a real blessing to me. I feel like they just fell into place. If they hadn't happened, even the things that I thought were frustrating at the time, getting pushed over to another team, changing managers, things like that. And I'm like, oh, this is just the worst. And then to look back a year, 2 years later and be like, had that not happened, I wouldn't be where I am today. And I'm extremely happy for where I am today as well. So I'm 100% with you. It's fun to do that too, right? There's a book called Never Eat Alone, and it is to me, it's one of the premium books for anybody going into any career, but especially technology. And it's like primary thesis is people are the reason every career is a success. Not just because, let me say it that way, not just because you're smart, not just because you're in the right place at the right time, but because I'm talking to you, and because I help you, you help me. And we kind of do it without expectation of anything being reciprocal, right? And so all of a sudden you find yourself doing this next thing and this next thing. And I look back at this pearl necklace and I'm like, well, if it wasn't for Jeffrey Palermo and that day I was able to talk to him on his podcast, this other thing wouldn't have happened. And it just goes on and on from there. It's really a neat book and a neat concept. And I really do believe it. I feel like the people that I've known along the way are the reason. I mean, it's kind of crazy. The reason that I'm here for sure. People that got me started in this industry, as well as kind of encouraged me or just kind of pulled me along in different things too. I'm a little bit curious though on your book. So your book on leadership. Do you have any children, Jeffrey?
I've got 3 kids. Yeah, first one's graduating high school next May.
All right. Well, congratulations. Wow, that's going to be a change to your home budget. That'll be nice. I have 3 as well. So I'm right there with you. We're in the same club. And it's funny how managing engineers, specifically engineers, not just ordinary humans, but engineers and parenting are so closely aligned. It really is like if you think of the skills that have made you a good dad, those are very translatable over to be skills to make you a great engineering leader.
Yeah. So true. So true.
Yeah. Well, partly because, passions are so high and personalities are so strong in the engineering world, and all of those sorts of things happen as well. And so listen, I've been at Microsoft now for 15 years. I started as a developer evangelist. And so evangelism is public speaking, basically. It's, our job was to go to different conferences, to engage everybody online. And back in those days, you don't see it so much today, but back in those days, evangelism was very local, very regional. And so I would go to user groups, before COVID killed them all. And I would go to local conferences and all of the things like that. And basically, and schools, that's an important part. And make sure that local universities that were on my list, I knew all of the deans. I knew all the important computer science professors, as well as the students who are leading the different computer, groups and things like that. That every university is slightly different on how they manage that. And then go there and you show up with some T-shirts and some pizza, get them all really excited about whatever the latest technology or version of Windows or whatever it is. And just kind of see the excitement go up. And it's very rewarding, especially in the student world, where you get to see people change their major, or even in the professional world, where you get to see people adjust the trajectory of their career so that it goes into a new direction. And so that was really cool. And so I was able to do that for about 9 years. Microsoft had a major change in the way they approach evangelism about 2018. And so that was kind of the advent of the Azure Developer Advocate, right? And so the Cloud Developer Advocate, as we call them today. And that was exciting too. There were a lot of internal political reasons that Microsoft did it that way. And that shift, for good or bad, was a significant shift. But if we kind of cast our minds back to that time between maybe 2010 to 2015, that was the golden age of Microsoft was everywhere. They were at every conference all the time. Yeah. Everybody had, a sticker pin or mug from Microsoft. And we were constantly just like a drumbeat, bringing the prescriptive guidance. That was a big thing back then, where we would have, remember, like enterprise libraries. Remember that from the Patterns and Practices team?
Yes.
And that was the dream, right? Where if I just did it the Microsoft way, Microsoft would even support it. Like, that's crazy. And that was the world we lived in. And it was beautiful. And we've kind of moved away from that. The world just got bigger, where a single prescriptive direction was kind of uncomfortable. And what's interesting to me is when we look at .NET Aspire, when we look at these new, they're not new, this repeating pattern of where we're coming to, it kind of brings us back to prescriptive guidance. So if you look at the way .NET Aspire is, that often it will be described as opinionated. And, opinionated is just the modern world for prescriptive guidance. And I always like to think of it more as a guideline than a rule. It says, this is the way you're supposed to do it. And you should be doing it this way unless you have a reason not to. And so you have this kind of flexibility that says, if you're thoughtfully not doing it the normal way, that makes total sense and is fine. But if you're thoughtlessly not doing it the normal way, you're kind of making a mistake, because you want to go along this prescriptive guidance that you just can count on an entire community of millions of developers kind of proving along the way. And so it's not quite the idea of design patterns where you have these design patterns that are also proven in different contexts and you compose them to create a solution. Really, it's different, right? It's more like saying, we'll do the composition for you, do it this way. And then keep your head on straight because you need to differentiate your company. You have to think about your own business requirements that may drive you down a different road.
Mm-hmm.
Totally fine. But until then, here's the way we want you to do it. And so certainly it is the leveraging of patterns. Certainly it's the leveraging of new patterns, or sometimes these are brand new patterns, which are actually old patterns with a new name or maybe a new technology behind them that enables them. But Aspire itself is pretty great. And one of the things, so I'm on the SQL Server team.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on the Data API Builder team specifically. We deliver Data API Builder in a container. So if you have a CRUD API against any database, so it like SQL, of course, or Postgres or MySQL or Cosmos, then you can use this to basically gut your solution of probably a third of its code and unit tests and some of the complexity around your CI/CD pipeline just by having this container. And so we deliver this container because it's nice and easy to do. But the reality is, regardless of the unbelievable popularity of containers, most developers still don't use them, still don't totally understand them, and for sure aren't comfortable with them. So to have .NET Aspire show up and say, listen, we get it. We're not going to shame you. You don't love it. We don't love it either. What if we just had .NET Aspire orchestrate and manage all of your containers so you don't have to think about it? And that's kind of the world we're approaching, where .NET Aspire has made it so that you're a C# developer. You like C#. You probably don't like YAML, just like me. And so now we can have .NET Aspire right in your pocket and deliver these solutions that are very scalable, very componentized, completely driven inside containers. And you don't even know how to spell container at the same time. So I feel like this was an inevitable step. If we could like backtrack 5 years, there was a time when we were like, everybody needs to learn Kubernetes and they need to learn it right now. Like there's just no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward 5 years from there to now, and it's like, I suppose some people still need to learn Kubernetes for sure. But a lot of these services now are abstraction layers on top of them to make it so that you get the benefits and all the capabilities of it without having to know every stinking knob and dial that you need to turn in order to get it right, or what most people do, get it wrong. And so it's really nice that these abstraction layers, they're inevitable. And so the fact that they're here now, we're kind of living in the future, and I like it. And so this is where I'm looking at .NET Aspire today. They could just stop now. To be honest, I feel like they're at a point where I'm completely happy with it. And I know that they'll continue to make it better and integrate it into other IDEs and make it more and more rich. Great. I want some sort of UI or all these things. Sure, no problem. But honestly, if they just stopped right now, it's really great because partly we can supplement the missing pieces of Aspire, or let's say the more specialized components of Aspire by introducing the community toolkit. So Data API Builder, I can integrate that easily directly into .NET Aspire just by using the community toolkit and saying .add Data API Builder. Now all of a sudden I've got my data API like I would want.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of beauty there that I feel like some developers are like, oh yeah, this new .NET Aspire, they think it's the new ASP.NET Core or something like that. They couldn't be more wrong, obviously. This is completely different than that. And they're not on the train, and they need to make sure that they at least understand what train they're not on. So as it leaves, they know what they're missing out on. There's just a lot of like candy and love being given by the .NET team to the developer community at large. And to see the response the way it is today, this is probably the future of most software development moving forward.
Well, I want to ask you about the opinions baked into Aspire, but before we get there, there's some listeners out there that have no idea what Data API Builder is. And they look at the GitHub repository and say, okay, well, there's a lot of code there for the last 3 years. Kind of back up for someone who's never used it before. What does it do for us and how do we use it?
Well, that's a good question. So one of the things to kind of recognize is, if we put the umbrella over all databases that Microsoft cares about, we would just call it Aspire Data, right? That's the team that organization that I'm ultimately in. Even SQL Server or Azure SQL Database or on-prem SQL Server, all of those still fall inside that. And so they all have focused like it. it is an immeasurable success SQL is to Microsoft. And if you were to take all their products and line them up, they would all be nice, but then there's SQL, and it is different than all of them. And it is extremely successful, extremely curated and like loved. Like, it's kind of bizarre. However, the culture inside SQL in the past was really targeting towards the DBA, and it really needed to be, because DBAs were the ones back then that decided these major enterprises how they were going to store their data and what their strategy was going to be moving forward. That's still true. We can't deny that DBAs are still a very important and significant part of the puzzle. However, what we didn't pay enough attention to was the developer side of things, because once you get past sort of these blue ribbon enterprises, you get to these kind of mid-level and small. They represent the long tail anyway. Add them all together, and they are impressively competitive to these large enterprises as far as market share and impact over the entire industry. And so, not paying attention to the developer meant this long tail we were sort of ignoring, because those are the ones that they didn't even hire a DBA. They, if they even engaged in a DBA, it was fractionally, and they would allow or assume that developers or architects would be the ones that would decide the data strategy for their company moving forward. And that's partly because of resources that they had, partly because of a lack of technical understanding that they had, also lack of things like regulations and things that drove these larger enterprises to make these really aggressive decisions to like pick SQL or these other relational databases that could deliver on performance and security and things like that. And so that was the past of SQL, where we didn't pay attention, or at least we didn't pay enough attention to the developer community. And then there was a change. About 4 years ago, there was a significant awareness of what was going on, and a decision internally inside SQL to sort of change the direction of the ship a little and make it so that we certainly won't leave our DBAs behind. That would be ridiculous. That would be terrible. However, to make it so that we bring into the fold the developer and start making decisions that are specifically positive for the developer experience, adding libraries and tools, updating all of our drivers, and introducing Data API Builder. So Data API Builder, about 3.5 years ago, was born because it recognized that it's just difficult to interact with a database if you don't already know how to. And a lot of developers, so if you're thinking of like student developers or hobbyists or like early professional developers interacting with the database, where they don't go into an enterprise that already has an established pattern that they just adopt and start using, then they just had to figure it out. And so they would go to, back then it would be Stack Overflow, I suppose, and or a blog, and they would run the risk of implementing a strategy that was out of date, right? Because now, the drivers now do this, or, we don't even use that version of Entity Framework anymore. You need to do this other one. Yeah. And it became a real headache to just interact with the database in a reliable way. And so we were like, listen, what if we just built Data API Builder as an API layer that basically said all CRUD operations against the database, and we'll support views, store procedures, and tables all alike, and all the data types, and we'll add all the security, and we'll have all the features with caching and all these other things that you might add into a typical data API. But instead of requiring you to do that sort of copy paste inheritance, where you would go to a previous project where you did it, copy it, bring it over here and make some subtle changes and potentially introduce some problems that you didn't mean to, then have the additional requirement of unit tests against those, and then have that additional requirement of sort of complicating your CI/CD pipeline to make sure all of that can be automated. We were like, let's just drop a container on them and make it so that you just give us a JSON file that indicates all of the things you want to show in your database, and that's it. And so that's where we built Data API Builder. And so now literally you can go into a typical application. So because this is HTTP and JSON over, it's just an API.
Yeah.
This doesn't have a language requirement, technology requirement. There's no library. There's no driver. There's nothing required except for you to be able to call an HTTP endpoint and be able to read and write JSON. And so that is very enabling to every developer you can imagine. So if you think about the most junior developer, interacting with JSON is trivial. They started with that. They understand how to serialize and deserialize. I'm a computer science professor here in Denver. And serializing and deserializing, that's like week 2. Like you go with like switch statements, if statements, deserializing, because it's such a fundamental table stakes, this bread and butter thing that you need to do in computer science, that thinking now that Data API Builder says, all right, you need to be able to do this, we're not really asking for anything. We're asking for what most developers could do with their eyes closed. And so that's the beauty of it. Data API Builder's kind of emerged now so that it handles even more features, and it's it can scale horizontally and vertically, different types of security schemas that it supports. And that's the whole idea, is to make it so that interacting with these databases, again, inside the umbrella of data or of Azure data, of the databases we care about, which are Microsoft SQL, both on-prem and not, and Postgres, Cosmos DB, and MySQL. And what's cool about it is open source and free. There's no premium tier. There's no way for me to charge you for it. You just take it. We give you the code, or we give you the container. There's no requirement that you have to do something for us. You don't even have to run it in Azure. You can run it in AWS or Google's cloud. You can run it on-prem. You can run both places. Doesn't really matter. And we expose it both as REST, which certainly is the easiest way to interact with the data API, or GraphQL, this sort of emerging way of writing nested and sophisticated queries.
Yeah.
And even GraphQL now we see with like this new, like right now we're in this like AI agent moment, right? Where everybody's talking about AI agents being interactive.
Right.
And so now, wouldn't it be nice if your AI agent then could talk to your database through something as simple, and you just flip a switch and it's enabled inside Data API Builder. So it's just a matter of time until I announce that we have that feature. And so
you can't do that till next month, right?
It's harder to engineer things super fast than you think,
I know.
as you know.
So
the Mythical Man month.
This makes me think of OData. That was all the rage, 07, 08, and then, but I mean, and it's still in Microsoft Excel, I can still import data from an OData feed, and that was kind of
you'll be
automatic.
Able to do that for a long time, Jeffrey, because OData is the fundamental technology behind Microsoft Graph. So it's not a graph API. It's the OData graph. And so when they chose OData, they basically gave OData a 50-year life is what they did. And so OData is like on fire right now. I mean, you have to think, there is no API in the universe that has as much usage as Microsoft's graph. I mean, all of Office is behind it. All of Windows is behind it. And so bam, you have to just think how like awesome it is. And it's completely OData. So I think a lot of developers, they realized that REST couldn't get nested entities very easily. And so OData enabled that, as well as projection, so that you can select only certain record or only certain columns, as well as add filters and order by and stuff. And so we've brought that capability, but it's not an OData feed.
Okay.
We brought that data capability into Data API Builder as well. So you don't need an OData library. You can just pass in the query string, what columns you want, whatever the filter is as well. And so we've brought a lot of its capability there as well. So I understand why you think it sounds like OData, because in a lot of ways it is. And if there's anything that's more like OData, it would be GraphQL. So GraphQL, it's not a graph. It's just a language called GraphQL that gives you a query language to be able to ask for all of the columns that you want, as well as nested items joined automatically inside it. So it makes it so that Data API Builder writes all the SQL for you, which is great, because if you're an engineering lead and you just hired an entire team and you realize most of them are junior, and junior developers, one key characteristic is they rarely know SQL, is now you can interact with SQL all you want, knowing that all the code they write will never actually be constructing SQL. And so when you think about using like Entity Framework, which still is spectacular. This is not saying don't use Entity Framework. There's still many good reasons to do it, just not as many reasons is all. And so there's still many good reasons. And the SQL that Entity Framework creates still deserves an audit, still deserves a review before you put this into production. And so it still requires quite a bit of SQL knowledge to really make it excellent. Even though you're able to use it to get started and kind of build your POC or even your initial implementation really quickly. Before you pull that trigger and cross the line into production, it still deserves a review or audit of the SQL that's actually being generated, that where you either profile for it or something to make sure it's doing what you want. And so it's not, you can't get away from needing SQL knowledge until you completely abstract it away into a data API.
So with Data API Builder, I'm thinking of a huge class of features or sections of the application where you're right, the data layer, just getting the plumbing going properly, it's a good amount of work. And you could say, oh, Copilot will be able to generate all that in some period of time. Okay, but I don't even want that code in my application if I can avoid it, regardless if somebody else generated it. So, but for those instances, is there a mode where it can be run in library mode, or do I have to do a network hop, and do I have to go through HTTP to make use of it?
Well, I mean, it's funny how you think about that. So you have to use HTTP to use a data API for sure. I mean, there's no getting around that, right? Yeah. And we definitely want to make sure that we don't feel like there's not that break. Now, most companies prefer that, right? They can control the network isolation a lot easier if they know exactly what's going to be calling it. It also allows you to do interesting things around migration if you're going from one version to another, or if you're just going from like on-prem to the cloud, right? And so the API just switches. You don't know anything on the inside. But if Copilot's going to write anything, I'm with you, right? So I think of it as brain surgery. If you're going to have a brain surgery,
I think about that all the time.
then I would rather have a real person do the brain surgery for me, because they'll be able to react to things that are completely nebulous to an AI. However, I don't mind an AI vacuum cleaning the floor while they're doing it, cleaning up let's hope there's no blood, but whatever it is. And like, I totally get the role. So now let's back that up into AI or into a data API. We've already, we don't need Copilot to build your data API, because we've already built it. We've already proven it. We've already tested the crap out of it. Not only that, well, we've given it to thousands of other developers who have implemented it as well, and they've tested it for you as well.
Yeah.
So now you have that, but Copilot can easily write an HTTP client call for you if you don't know how to do a GET request or a POST request. That's the that's the nickel and dime code that you would want to be able to offload to an AI to get right every time, for sure, right? Even if you wrapped it inside some sort of a user class, made it so that it was a repeatable kind of repository that you use, great. That's still the right thing to do. I mean, moving forward, there's going to be a lot more Copilot code, for sure. You and I feel the way you feel, but I'm trying to not feel the way you feel, because I realize the future is not only inevitable, but it's coming awkwardly fast.
Oh, I think before this calendar year is up, I'll be putting a AI-driven development bootcamp course on the calendar. Yeah. I mean, it's almost with the Copilot edit mode and the advances there. It's just a matter of time. I mean, as soon as the tooling will generate the code that I would have written anyway, because I have established patterns. Well, why would I want to hammer out, even with IntelliSense, why would I want to hammer out? It's a progression. In my opinion, I'm a bulldozer on this. I'm pushing forward because we already use IntelliSense, so we don't have to type every character. And then it's just a progression. Well, now I've already done completions where now I can do a whole line. Copilot's already doing a whole method. It's like, well, how much can it do? Because if I'm happy with the code, then I save time. Now, if I'm not happy with the code, then it's just junk. But if I'm happy with the code and I would have written it that way anyway, let's go.
Once Copilot turns it, so we have, C# analyzers, right? So what's nice about a C# analyzer inside any of these tools is they're so deterministic. So if you're deep into a method and all of a sudden you call something async and it was a synchronous method, the analyzer pops up and says, would you like me to make this method async instead?
Yeah.
And I say yes, and I don't scroll to the top and double check the syntax. I just trust it because it's an incredibly reliable and deterministic tool. As soon as Copilot becomes this deterministic tool that says, can you imagine Copilot saying something like this? It would be like, Jeffrey, I see that you're doing this. Do you want to do it like Project A? You just want to repeat that again here? I can do that for you. Yeah. That's when it is unbelievable. It's like, oh, you want me to do you, not this kind of random, because I have seen, you have experienced, I'm sure, the quality of the prompt makes all the difference, right? And but even then, I could repeat the prompt and get a different response. And that bothers me a little bit, because even though I know software is an art, it's not a science. It needs to be a science when it comes to the way I use AI. Like, I need to know exactly what it's going to do. Otherwise, I'm going to spend all day reviewing code. And that's not what I want to do. So I don't want to necessarily spend all day writing code either, but I don't want to just review code and then realize it didn't do it the way I wanted to, that if I had written it, it would have been the way I wanted.
Right. And So you mentioned earlier when you were talking about Aspire and Data API Builder, you mentioned being an opinionated and running in containers. And so as you and your colleagues talk about the vision for this with Aspire and a container with this data layer with standard HTTP endpoints, what do you think the shape of, lots and lots of .NET applications are going to be with Data API Builder as a component and Aspire as providing some of the opinions?
Well, that is a tricky answer because if we go back to like the AI Copilot tooling inside Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code right now, as they announce it and they're like, hey, look what it can do now. Even when you see it, you're like, this is definitely a bridge. This is the interim time. That feature is going to be washed away and improved for sure. I feel like the same thing is happening now. So if you and I were on a project together and we were about to write a solution, we'd be like, okay, well, do we write this in containers or not? And you're like, well, I don't want my database to run in a container. I want my database to run as a service so that I get all the like scalability of the cloud. You're like, okay. I'm like, what about your data API? Well, I want that to run in a container because of Data API Builder. All right. What about Redis? You're going to have any kind of like level 2 cache? They're like, yes, and I would like that in a container because that's nice and easy to like control. All right, great. What about the website that you're writing? Do you want that to be in a container? We're like, let's flip a coin because there's reasons to do it and there's reasons not to do it. And so now all of a sudden there are some things. So it, as opinionated as it is, it also says like you probably should do everything in containers. That's kind of the .NET Aspire approach, right? Like why wouldn't you do it in containers? Until you get to things like databases where it happily will hand off to just a connection string.
Yeah.
And but let's go back to the front end. Should the website be inside it, or maybe you're writing a mobile application that wouldn't run in a container anyway; it'd run inside a mobile device. And so now there are real choices that need to be made by engineers. Like things have to be kind of decided. Once you decide and you have this handful of containers and you're ready to go, where to push this off to is really kind of complicated. Partly because if you're not in the cloud, you've got to figure out an orchestration and container hosting solution locally. If you are in the cloud, well, if you're in Azure, then it's straightforward. Then you can just use like ACA, Azure Container Apps. You can create the network. And honestly, Aspire kind of does all that for you directly into ACA and you get it done. And so that kind of solves it, makes it easy. Even though you might wish you hadn't, right? You might say, oh, I really wish this website was an app service because app service has this one capability that I don't get with a container. So now I want to move it over there. And so I feel like we're still at this like bridge technology, this kind of in between where we have gotten to the point where container-based development is actually very logical and makes a lot of sense. It also is a great way to separate concerns and make sure that all your developers are working on individual things and for you to be able to swap out componentry, create seams for upgrades. There's so many good reasons to do it. And yet it is a little complicated once you go into production. And so I see a lot of developers actually uncontainerizing their application because they already know how to deploy a website. They just don't really know how to deploy a container. And so that becomes kind of the difficulty. I anticipate there's going to be a future. I anticipate this for a lot of reasons. And I anticipate there'll be a place where you will create a solution container it'll be a solution environment with a handful of predefined orchestrations between certain types of containers, so that when you deploy this solution, you're not thinking where every container goes. You're just thinking of choosing the solution itself. And so I'll go to, let's say it's like ACA, and I'll say it's going to be like this, and it asks a couple of questions, and I'll say go, and it's just ready for me to deposit as many containers I need to, with all the communication, with all of the shared secrets, with all of the things like that already kind of implemented. That today, it's still some elbow grease to get all of that in place. And it's worthwhile to spend that elbow grease because this is still a better overall approach. But that elbow grease actually freaks people out because if they're not super accustomed to it and they haven't deployed 15 solutions, then they realize it's easy to make a mistake and do it wrong. It's a lot easier to fall back to what they know today and just repeat it rather than use these new technologies. So I really do feel like we're sort of in this kind of transition stage. What do you think, Jeffrey?
I can see the writing on the walls of containers being the common unit of deployment. And then Azure saying, oh, well, yeah, it's a container, but let us run it for you as a scalable service and doing some of that. And even app service, where if you have a dozen low usage web applications, then you can just put them on the same app service as, a dozen websites, and it happily shares compute and happily shares memory. And whereas right now, it's not streamlined to put a dozen web applications in the same container, thereby using the same assigned processors and the same assigned memory.
Right.
So some of that needs to be fleshed out. But one thing that I hope the dust settles quickly is the local developer environment. You mentioned you're just spinning up the containers locally with, some of the, like Docker Desktop being a commercial product and not working 100% stable on Windows, and other people saying, oh, use Podman.
Yeah.
Like your team, what do y'all use for the orchestration locally?
Well, we still use Docker.
Docker Desktop.
And the problem is, as many problems as Docker has, it has fewer problems than everybody else for now. Maybe Podman will like supplant it someday, right? I don't see why not. And I like the idea of things that are free, but there's disadvantages to things that are free. I mean, you probably saw where Docker Desktop now has an the easy button for deploying an AI model, right? And it's just things like that are going to help it kind of remain kind of the de facto. It is pretty expensive, but you know what? So is Visual Studio. And so people, especially in enterprises or large, serious, customers this is the cost of doing business to be able to do stuff like that. So it's funny. We as engineers are always drawn towards the free library, right? We don't want to pay anything because we're all just like cheapskates, it seems like.
I don't think it's much of a cost, because you're right, Visual Studio and just the cost of labor. But, some people, no problems with Docker Desktop. And then other people, it's like, man, every week or so, I've got to uninstall Docker Desktop and reinstall it from scratch or factory reset because something messed up and now it just doesn't work. It's like, what causes, maybe they'll fix those stability issues.
I have not had that happen to me. Are you serious? That's terrible.
Yeah.
Well,
And if any of the listeners out there knows, like, what is that little twiddle that gets you into that state, please let me know. Or, because I'm sure somebody out there knows, like, oh yeah, if this and this happen, then your installation's hosed and you got to reinstall. But anyway,
in a lot of ways, SQL Server has sort of given us the example. I mean, back in the day, you would be like, where do our logs get stored? How do we deal with all this memory? What do we do? Do we have all the components installed? What do we do with Service Pack 1? And nobody thinks like that, especially with Azure SQL DB, right? That's so out of mind that it's actually kind of ridiculous to even talk about it.
Yeah.
And eventually container development will be the same way. We'll deploy and you won't even think about it. Like today, you're like, wow, can this container even talk to that? Why are you asking that question?
Yeah.
Of course it can. It knows that it can because it read your code and it built the network for you. That's the way you deploy these solutions. Today, we don't do that, but it won't be long until we have all of this kind of inner pocket. And people look at this type of conversation that you and I are having about the complexity or sort of the things that are in the way of a smooth deployment of containers. And they'll talk about it like it's punch cards, right? They'll be like, "Oh, you silly old people." But that I look forward to that day because I feel like, first, like you, it's the writing on the wall. But also, I think it's logical. I think you can follow the argument of it, and that's the way you would actually want to do it. If I was writing the check and it was my company, I'd be like, "You better containerize all this stuff." Absolutely right. Well, it's really hard.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I'm paying you. The hardest part of having a job is work, and so like, go ahead and do it. But it will be nice when it's all a little bit easier, partly because it'll be harder to get it wrong.
Yeah. Well, I love the concept. I love the architectural concept of Data API Builder because so many applications have a significant amount of SQL Server interaction that is just CRUD. That's not particularly complicated. It just has to happen. And it's always a significant amount of work. And then when you have performance issues, like, oh yeah, it's hidden there. But there's one scenario as we kind of wrap up here, the select N+1 problem with that's been for 2 decades. I think there's been a conversation in the industry where you have a join and the OR mapper, it happily gives you a query. And then for everything in the collection, it gives you another query. So you end up with like 200 queries being run. And for developers who have no idea how joins work and how the data interaction works, I can see
which is a
that
bunch.
persisting to, oh, now I'm doing 200 HTTP calls, because that kind of thing. So it's not just, oh, it happens to be SQL and Entity Framework versus something else. And so at some point, they still have to learn how to aggregate data from multiple tables into a single call, right?
Well, I want to say yes to that because fundamentally it's true that that basic concept needs to be like registered in your mind, and so you don't get it wrong because it's so easy to get and it's so commonly wrong. However, it's just weird. Are you saying this because we're releasing it in our next version of Data API Builder?
I actually have no idea what your roadmap is. There's no inside knowledge. I'm just thinking
that is absolutely
that's been
hilarious.
such a big problem with databases, and it's almost like without fail, everything works fine in the test environment. And then when you get to production and then certain data tables grow and grow and grow and grow, select n plus one was hiding because it was only an additional 12 records that you were querying. You didn't notice it. And now it's like an additional 500 records and 500 calls, round trips. And oh, by the way, you noticed that.
Yeah. And well, we've always had pagination, but it's funny that we are just about to release 1.5. And gosh, this is a major topic. You know what's even funnier? At the beginning of this podcast, you asked me about putting it inside as a library instead of as a container. And I mean, this is open source, so we talk about a roadmap all the time.
Yep.
And that is also on the short list of our roadmap
to
make it basically middleware inside ASP.NET Core. That's kind of
actually that's fine because you would still go through the entire stack. You would just ignore the network hop portion of the logic so that you didn't engage the network card.
Yeah, not just that. You would also be able to add custom logic without having to introduce an additional container or object, right? And so if you're like, I need this to be pure CRUD, and we allow a little bit around the edges, but for the most part, it's pure CRUD. But you're like, but actually, I need to do this one thing. And it's funny how this happens, right? How you can do all these things except for that one, and you're like, oh, scrap the whole thing. And so we'll have that from time to time with a customer, especially a major customer, and they will. And so this would solve it, and this would make it so that you could have it not just so that you could add this as a middleware inside your own ASP.NET Core application. You could add it as middleware to an Azure function. And so it would just be there, right? And so all these little things that it would enable, like from a kind of a topological perspective of what we do architecturally, is pretty spectacular. And so I'm getting probably a little ahead of my skis here talking about it because it's certainly not going to come. We're not going to announce it at Build, but it is something that we are constantly talking about. And so it is very high priority for us. And so we'll see how things go. You know, it's kind of fascinating, Jeffrey, to be part of an open source project. I'll say that 99% of the code is written by internal engineering at Microsoft that we do most of the investment. But as time has kind of passed and as we've nurtured the community that we have and things like that, we start getting more and more contributions. And it's kind of amazing. It really is it's not a multiplier to our velocity, but certainly we can feel the difference where we're coming up like version 1.5 and we have a handful of things that we're doing where we're like this, but we're also doing this, and 3 actual features that are completely from the community. Nice. It's kind of mind blowing, to be honest, to have something like that happen. It's hard, right? Because they all submit a PR, but we have to review the PR because when it all boils down to it, I mean, we have to make sure that everything's consistent. We have to make sure it's fully, we have to go through our internal security for it, even to have our name on it. And so there's a lot of requirements around it like that, but it has been a really positive experience to kind of see the community sort of engage. And it's pretty impressive just how smart engineers outside of Microsoft are as well. So it's been really good.
Oh, I can see it coming. There's going to be a community contribution, GitHub Copilot agent. And the instructions is take this external PR and just add whatever's necessary to make it Microsoft compliant, yada, 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 with all the other stuff that external people, don't even think about.
Right. And I put that on a timer, so everything just gets merged in. We don't even know what happened.
Right.
This sounds like a best practice.
There's all kinds of extra C# attributes and this and that that go into all these Microsoft code bases that that are on top of everything. So.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We have tons of nonsense like that. You're absolutely right. And some of it's even counter to MSDN. Well, MSDN, can you believe I even said that? Wow. That's
MSDN
back in the day
documentation.
No, yeah, that was great.
Microsoft Learn documentation.
Yeah, the Microsoft Learn standards, right? If you go and you're like, hey, should I capitalize my local variables? Like that'd be an example, right? Well, we have extremely prescriptive guidance on that of what you should do, but you don't have to. And but internally, Microsoft engineering overall as just like this subculture inside Microsoft has its own set of requirements like that. And they don't always match up to the external ones.
Yeah.
And for lots of reasons, right? I mean, just personal preference, vanity, stuff like that. There's a lot of reasons. Yeah. Sometimes it's the lawyers get involved. And so, yeah, the things that you see at the top of all of our code pages, like no developer wants that, but we have to, right? Because we have to say, what the warranty is, what the license is. We can't just let the license.md file inside the repository do the work for us. And so stuff like that's kind of hard to get used to. Hey, thank goodness for .NET format. What a beautiful feature inside the .NET CLI that basically just applies it all for us. It's really nice. So we'll have contributors that will follow exact standards, right? So beautiful. And we're like, we got to change all your variable names.
Right. Well, since we mentioned it, we'll include a link to the official C# code conventions from Microsoft Learn.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's great.
Because I'm sure there's lots of people who've never seen, it's like, really? There's .NET code conventions? What are they?
Well, let me ask you, Jeffrey, a private field inside a class, do you add an underscore as a prefix or not?
Oh, I do. Yeah, because
I do too. I always have.
It's been that way for forever, and yeah.
Right. How else can you visually know the scope of a variable? It's impossible.
Well,
is it just a parameter being passed in that's the same casing?
If you did not do that, there's so many instances now where if you have a automatic constructor parameter, well, now you have that guy, and I mean, you can make all kinds of arguments, but it's worked. And I mean, I started coding in 1997. I bet you there, if we really analyzed it, there's so many things that I do that if I really wanted to like reinvent my rationale for doing something from scratch, maybe I'd do something different. But I'm not going to devote one iota of mental horsepower to analyzing of whether that should change. It's like I'm going to think about other things.
I'm right there with you. The fact that there's so much pressure to take that underscore away is hilarious. When you look at a constructor and you have to say this dot field equals parameter because of the same name, same casing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You're illustrating the problem. But this is trying to fix the nightmare. Like just fix it with another. You know what? This is merging into a religion war here. So there are a lot of people who are like, absolutely not. But most of those people, their first language was JavaScript.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with GitHub, and we should be able to do an analytical rationale. It's like how many lines of code use the camel case underscore and how many don't.
That'd be fun.
And I bet you would see that if you wanted to get rid of the camel case, it's like, well, are you really going to redo 80% of the world's C# code?
Right.
Seriously?
Right.
No. What's the point?
Yeah.
And so anyway.
Yeah, it's I don't put the M. Now that's full on C++ right there. M underscore, like member underscore.
Yeah, and Visual Basic kind of adopted that in the 90s from
it did
a lot.
That's where I learned it.
Module level variable. That's right.
Yeah.
So, well, hey, funny. Jerry, thanks so much for coming on the Azure and DevOps podcast and sharing with us what data goodness is going into .NET Aspire.
So much is, and you know what? It's already there too. So much of it. And we have the next version of Visual Studio of .NET of Data API Builder about to be released. When that happens, we'll release our next MCR container, which is MCR is the Microsoft Container Repository, and then it will automatically just flow into the community toolkit. So pretty exciting to have all of these. And now we have second level cache, so we can go to Redis and all these things that are all fully open telemetry now. Which, if anything, there are so many benefits from .NET Aspire, but if anything else, it has been the thing that has brought to the forefront open telemetry support and custom tracing inside open telemetry so that your components don't just use the default telemetry. Oh, it's beautiful. Just to be able to see the lines and you're like, oh, okay, that's exactly where the lag is or whatever. It's really beautiful. So thank you to .NET Aspire for that. All the other things, thank you as well, but especially for this.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Jeffrey. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine. And until next time, dear listener, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.